Hello and welcome back to my corner. I am the DM as always, and today we've got another one from Ben Shapiro, and this time it includes Jordan Peterson. And I've already seen this. However, I thought that the video itself warranted more attention and perhaps a reaction, because I had a few things in mind with this video. So let's just dive right in.
About the sort of lack of meaning that people are looking for, particularly young men. And it really is a big thing that young men seem to have lost meaning. Postmodernism killed the scientific rationalist world. And the postmodernists have decided to substitute for that a certain utopian vision of the remolding of American society in terms of what they call equity, but really amounts to tribal dynamics. And you see this over and over, the radical left pushing its own version of utopianism. Classical liberals have been wrong-footed, I think, by the need for something more fulfilling, which is why classical liberalism always relied on an unspoken assumption that you were going to find meaning in your family, you were going to find meaning in religious community, you were going to find meaning in bettering your social life outside of government. But when that unspoken understanding just dissipated, when religion started to fall apart, all that was left was, well, let's just be rational with one another. There's not much inspiring there, and I think that's why you see that across the board, a drive toward irrationalism, a certain level of romanticism dominating the society, to the point where irrationalism is much more prized than rationalism. If you make a rational point, if you cite data, very often this is now considered not only impolitic, but damaging and dangerous.
The other thing that ideology does, and the radical leftists are also very good at this, is that it provides you with a convenient locale for the existence of evil. And so if you reflexively identify the patriarchy with evil, well, first of all, that's a powerful idea. It independent of its broad merit. It's true. Now, it's not the only truth, and it's not the complete truth, but it's true. The reason it's true is because every hierarchical system tends to degenerate in the direction of power. And all hierarchical systems are less than they could be. And that's partly because of the possibility that power and deceit will corrupt them, but also partly because we're willfully blind and deceitful in our own personal lives. And so when you tell young people that the cause of the trouble they see around them in the world, and maybe even the disquiet in their own heart, is the malevolent inadequacy of their society, that rings true. And they don't hear the rest of the story, you know.
Yeah. If we stop and we take a second to look around our country, just in the United States, there's a lot of that going on. You have it on both the right and the left side, but you do see it a lot more with the left, where they will say something that on the surface sounds very catching. It sounds very relatable to the average American, like fighting back against gun violence. That sounds, on the surface level, very, very good. It sounds like that's something that we should be doing, and we should be taking whatever measures we need to do it. But on a much deeper level, it means something far different. We saw in my last video just exactly how far Democrats are now willing to go to get their agenda pushed across. And that is abolishing the filibuster, the thing that was put in place specifically to prevent one side or another from taking complete control, and expanding the Senate specifically with people that agree with them, not the Senate, expanding the Supreme Court specifically with people that agree with them, despite the fact that the Supreme Court is supposed to remain entirely unbiased, because they're the highest court of law in the land.
And it's the rest of the story that I've been trying to tell. They don't hear the story that, yeah, don't forget about the evil and corruption that exists in your own heart. And don't forget about the fact that nature, this wondrous goddess as portrayed by the anti-human environmentalists, and by that I don't mean all environmentalists, by the way, that wonderful goddess nature is also trying to make you ill and kill you at all times. And so, but the story that corruption exists in hierarchical structure and that that's a consequence of malevolence, the malevolent use of power and deceit, that's true. So it's very motivating, especially if you're young and you're looking for an adventure. Now, it's also too convenient, which is one of its tremendous dangers, because unless you're taught to look within and identify the malevolence there as the primary moral obligation, then you now have an excuse and a moral justification to take out all of your negative emotion, your hostility, your resentment, everything about you that's unexamined on the demonic enemy. And of course, that degenerates with extraordinary rapidity, as we've seen over and over and over. So it's up to the centrists on both sides to deal with this. I've been talking to a lot of the optimist rationalist types on my podcast, Matt Ridley and Bjorn Lomborg and Haidt and Pinker more distantly, but more recently Lomborg and Ridley and Marian Tupy, who's written a lovely book on human progress, 10 things everyone needs to know about human progress. It's something like that, huh? Anyways, one of the things we discussed consistently was the difficulty in promoting the message that all three of these men are very aware of, which is that from a material perspective, in terms of absolute privation, worldwide, humanity is way better off on virtually every dimension you could possibly measure than ever. And most of that improvement has occurred in the last 40 years, and it's been revolutionary in its speed. And no one knows this. And so it's very important to try to think through why that is. Like, that's such a positive message. Now, I talked to Russell Brand about this, and I'm bringing him up for a reason. He's a lefty by temperament and by heart. And his first objection, but he's very thoughtful and quick. His first objection, I pointed out all this data showing that by every possible objective measure, everything is way better than it was certainly 100 years ago, but certainly even 20 years ago, even on the environmental front in the main. And he said, well, what about disparity of distribution? So there's the problem of absolute level of wealth, let's say. That's improving. But there is still tremendous disparity. And of course, that is fair enough. You could even point out that the role of the left is to provide a conscientious voice for that's constantly attending to the fact of continuing disparity, regardless of absolute level of wealth.
And this is something that I like about Jordan, is he won't just state the facts. He won't just give you the numbers and the sources and everything. He won't just cite everything. But he has taken the argument from the opposing side, validated it himself, with this being the disparity of wealth versus the absolute wealth of the world. And he's validated it because there is a disparity between the absolute wealth of the world and the general wealth of everyone, right? We have like the top earners, like the billionaires and we have all these billionaires, and yet we still have people on the streets. We still have vets on the streets. We have people that don't have food. We have people that don't have housing. We have people that don't have jobs. But we have all these billionaires. So there's this huge disparity, right? And that's something that I like about Jordan Peterson, is he accepts the fact that he has all this evidence stating that we are objectively better off than we were even 20 years ago, let alone 100 or more, right? And yet, in that same vein, accepting and acknowledging that there's this large disparity. I'm going to pause this video real quick because I want to show you all something that I don't think a lot of people seem to realize. Alright, so this is Hank Green. I'm sure a lot of you already know who he is. And this is what he has to say about the Leviathan of Parsonstown.
Important things to remember in life is that just because you are right about something doesn't mean that the person who disagreed with you was wrong. And that has been taught to me by the Leviathan of Parsonstown, which was the largest telescope ever made in 1845. It remained the largest telescope for an awful long time. And you know what the Leviathan of Parsonstown was built mainly to do? It was built to figure out what the little smudgy things in the sky were. People were having a huge debate about what the smudgy things in the sky were. There were stars, and there were planets, and there were smudges. One group of people thought that they were like collections of really distant stars that were so far away, but there was like a ton of them, and so they looked smudgy, like the Milky Way looked smudgy, but really small. And another group thought that they were just lit up piles of gas. They fought about it and yelled, and then they built the telescope, and they looked up at the sky, and they found that some of the smudges were really far away star collections called galaxies, and some of them were lit up piles of gas inside of our galaxy called nebulas. Everyone was right! One of the most
Everyone was right. They disagreed. Both parties disagreed on a fundamental level, on a base level, on just a flat ground. They thought that that the other side was wrong. End of story. And then they looked at the facts. They looked at the evidence, the things that they could see for themselves, and they realized they were both right. Now, the thing this teaches us is that just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that you have the right to sit there and try to invoke some kind of bullshit cancel culture or wokeism onto them because you think they're wrong. Because they, for all you know, are completely right. Just like you. But you won't know that because instead of trying to figure that out, you're too busy sitting there blaming them and saying, no, you're wrong, I'm right. Instead of just looking at the facts.
And fair enough, but having said all that, it's a great mystery that incremental optimism is not sufficiently motivating. And you can't just wish human nature is going to change. It's not going to change. We got to tell a better story. And I also think that's why I'm a target, I think, is because I am actually trying to tell a better story, and I'm actually having some success with it.
So I totally agree with that. And that really does bring us to the book, because one of the things that folks should know about all of your books is that they are very intimate, very personal. Now, you talk about yourself, but you also speak in a way that most writers do not. You use second-person pronouns. I mean, you speak directly to the reader. You say, you feel this way. You think this way. And a lot of people read that and say, I do think that way. This is a person who's speaking directly to me in a way that mainstream political books very often do not. They consider me sort of a widget in whatever ideology they're pushing, or they're considering the value of systems or not systems. But you sort of end around that. And I think that in many ways that's what members of the left find so threatening, is because if you're a member of the left and you believe that all individuals are essentially just the outgrowths of institutions, and therefore that all change by individuals is going to be insufficient, and that it must be societal change that creates individual change, you're a threat, because you're telling people, well, the systems can certainly get better, but the main threat to you is you. And that is a deeply threatening message to people. And if people find fulfillment in that message, then the left really does have a problem, because if people start improving their lives within the system and not blaming the system for their problems, and instead recognizing that they can improve their lives, that's what members of the left hate most of all. You talk about in the book, Jordan, the fact that people are constantly coming up to you and they're saying things like, I was leading a dissolute life. I read your book, I started taking your advice, and I've turned it around, and now I'm doing much better in life. And I'm blessed to have much the same experience from a lot of people who listen to the show, people who have been homeless, who now have graduated Harvard Law School, people who were single moms and then decided to take a college course and figure out their lives, people who have made mistakes and turned their mistakes around. And to me, those are inspirational stories. I think that because those inspirational stories exist, that I think is why people find you to be such a threat. It's because so many people are inspired by the stuff that you say and change their life individually without putting all of their ire and focus on a system that the left is mainly focused on tearing down.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, just last video, we heard a Democrat themselves straight up state that they will abolish the filibuster and expand the Supreme Court for their own political gain, just to get their way, just to get what they want. It's strange, and it's very scary. And another thing, if you look throughout history, the people that the individuals who get the largest rallyings behind them are typically people who speak, who don't just speak to the masses and to the downtrodden and the everyday individual. It's individuals who have charisma. It's individuals who don't just speak facts, but speak objective facts. They aren't people who just repeat and regurgitate information that other people claim. They themselves put themselves into these positions where they have to lead the people. They don't just they don't sit behind a desk somewhere speaking fancy words and making all these claims. They're out there on the streets with the people that they want to help. The best and most recent example that I can think of is Martin Luther King. He is a fantastic speaker. Amazing speaker. And when he spoke, you could not only feel the energy, even from just watching videos, but you can understand what he's talking about and why he's talking about it. I have found that some of the greatest speakers in history are the ones that I agree with the most. Martin Luther King, Charlie Chaplin. Despite the fact that he was a comedian, he had one of the greatest speeches of all time, in my opinion. Maybe I'll do a video on that here soon. But the people who can go out and speak, and not only go out and speak, but go out and lead, those are the people that we need. Those are the people that we want. We don't want people who are just going to be talk. We want people who are just going to shut up, get behind those closed doors, and do their job. Their job is not standing in front of a camera and speaking to the public saying how much of a tragedy something is. Their job is to get behind those closed doors and work something out to solve the issue. That's their job, and they aren't doing their job.
I defy anyone to go read 10,000 comments on my YouTube channels and not come away with a much better, with a much refreshed view of human nature. The comments are, in the main, unbelievably positive, and not in a naive sense. They're positive in a thoughtful sense, and in a communal sense, because the people who are making comments on the lectures are also commenting on each other. And there's ideological babble on both sides. I would say that's probably 5% of the comments. And generally, I believe they're written by people who didn't actually watch the lecture, because they're often out of context. But in any case, 95% of the comments are thoughtful, but also extremely positive, which is very rare in a social media comment landscape, which tends to be very, very toxic. And so I think that's absolutely great. And it certainly has that impact on me when I read it. But then here's something else that I've observed in the media attacks that have been directed towards me. They're not just directed towards me. well, first they're directed to who they think I am. So that's kind of interesting to begin with. But more than directed to me, and more perniciously, is that they're directed to those who are hypothetically following me. Now, I don't regard myself as someone with followers. I regard myself as someone with viewers, listeners, and readers. And that's different. But in any case, my typical follower, so goes the story, is a disaffected, angry, young white male. And for a while, I, in some sense, pushed back against that and said, well, my audience is about 70% male, but YouTube skews male, so that's perhaps part of the reason. And I see no evidence that it's particularly limited racially or ethnically, especially when I see my lecture crowds and when I meet people on the street. But then I started to realize that that was the wrong response. The right response is, why does it disturb you so much that there's a group of people who, by your own admission, are disaffected and angry and alienated and young, and I'm helping them? And why is that exactly a problem? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing with them? Just out of curiosity. What do you think? If you had your druthers, would I ignore them? Would no one talk to them? Is that actually what you want? Well, the answer seems quite clear, that that is exactly what's wanted. That's what's held forth, because there's this implicit assumption in all of this critique that in my very active aid, I'm doing something immoral. Immoral enough to be parodied, let's say, as Red Skull. And so just what the hell's going on here? It's like, why is that now fodder for parody or slander? Precisely. I mean, do you debate the fact that I'm helping? Well, you go read the comments yourself and see what you think. And so then I thought about that a bunch too. I thought, well, what is it with men, the men that I'm speaking to, let's say, why are they responding positively? Why did they come to my lectures, the biblical lectures even, which is very surprising, right? Because what the hell are men doing at a biblical lecture, especially young men, especially when they could go do anything else and they have to pay for it? It's like, what are they doing coming to this lecture? Well, if the patriarchy is an evil tyranny, then the appropriate attitude towards any male ambition is to not treat it as ambition, but to treat it as nascent drive to tyrannical power, which is certainly what Foucault would recommend, for example, or Derrida, because it's all power. And so if you see some young man trying to stand up and better himself in any dimension, you're not going to trust that. You're going to identify that as the manifestation of tyrannical power. And clearly, if the patriarchy is a malevolent tyrant, then any sign of the desire to contribute to it should be, at minimum, not encouraged, but more subtly criticized and discouraged at every possible opportunity. And that's our culture.
Man. You hear that? Let's play that again. Let's play that again.
Of the desire to contribute to it should be, at minimum, not encouraged, but more subtly criticized and discouraged at every possible opportunity. And that's our culture.
To criticize at every possible opportunity. What was that other word?
At every encouraged, but more subtly criticized and discouraged at every...
Criticized and get discouraged at every possibility. At every possibility. And what is it that our culture and our society is doing nowadays? I mentioned it earlier in this video. Say it with me. Cancel culture. It's this idea that anyone who disagrees with you and attacks you, especially if you're a part of a minority group, needs to be attacked and destroyed and dismantled and removed from society. It happened on Twitter with Trump. I don't agree with Trump. I hate the man. I think he did a lot to set this country back. But I think Joe Biden has as well, just as I have thought that about most all of our politicians. at this point. However, in the United States Constitution, it states that we have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And the Digital Millennium Copyright Act helped play a part in that, as well as several other bills and laws and legislation that have been passed to ensure that speech is not prohibited or restricted. Now, primarily, this applies obviously to companies that operate within the U.S. Twitter operates within the U.S. Now, from my knowledge, had Twitter stayed a private company, they would actually be allowed to ban Trump, and it would be whatever. However, as a publicly traded entity, they have to follow certain rules and regulations. It's part of the reason why YouTube is very hesitant to step in on any DMCA claims. If your video gets DMCA'd, if YouTube actively steps in and it goes to court, and the court finds that the video was copyright infringement and is subject to DMCA, then YouTube can get in trouble for that because they stuck up for you. However, if they don't do anything about it and simply let it be, then if it goes to court and it turns out that it was or wasn't or anything, YouTube's not going to be held responsible because they didn't try to step in. It's essentially a way to protect larger companies like this from being prosecuted for the content on their site. It basically means that as long as YouTube doesn't attempt to interfere with the content or moderate the content itself, the content can remain, and the content, or the person who published the content is the one that is held liable for that content, not the actual company. I forget the exact specifics and whatnot. I know I've heard it from I believe it was Legal. If I can find that video, I'll probably do a reaction video to it, or maybe just put it down to the description here if I can remember. But that's essentially simplifying it all. That's essentially why YouTube doesn't really get involved with any DMCA strikes, and it's part of the reason why Twitter removed Trump. Now, I don't think that Twitter should have removed Trump. I think that's very stupid. I think it does infringe on free speech. And I think that he should have been allowed to say what he did, even if I don't agree with it, and even if I think it's misinformation. However, on the flip side, if people really want to be able to go somewhere and say anything that they want and not be moderated, you have Reddit. You can put literally almost anything you want onto Reddit. Unless it violates like some kind of federal or state law, they're not even going to care. They effectively don't remove anything from their platform. That's the entire point of Reddit. All of the subreddits and whatnot are moderated by their communities, by the people that are participating in that community. It's essentially a massive forum for other forums and other subforums and sub-subforums and so on and so forth. Reddit has existed for forever. Now, I think it's a toxic cesspool filled with not a lot of intelligent conversations the vast majority of the time, but there are a lot that are genuinely helpful and do exist to try and better society. And we really need to just kind of stop and take a second to think about our culture and look at our culture and what our culture is propagating. Because a lot of our culture is centered around demeaning and telling people that the system is always out to get you, that the system is just there to keep you down, and that the man's out to stop you and all this shit. And that's factually wrong. We live in a capitalist society, whether you want to accept it or not. And in a capitalist society, if you're willing to put in the effort and willing to actually shut up, lace up, and get to work, you can make it. And if you don't believe me, I have someone I want you to check out. It's a rapper by the name of Dax. D-A-X. Okay? He is an extremely successful rapper. Black rapper. Okay? He does not rap about guns. He doesn't rap about violence. He doesn't rap about drugs. He doesn't rap about getting sex all the time and all this other crap like every other stereotypical rapper does. And like a lot of these really trash mumble rappers, even though they're not rappers, they're just... My point is, he doesn't rap about what the stereotypical bullshit is in rap. He raps about motivational shit. He raps things to help you motivate yourself and get out there and hustle and grind and make that bread. That's what his entire career is about. He ain't never had no radio plays. He ain't never signed to no label. His merch isn't in any kind of store out on the market, which means all of the costs are kept low and they aren't marked up because of bullshit media and bullshit propaganda. And he started off as a janitor making $7.25. And now he's making 6-7 digit figures. A black man, completely independent, no corporations, no radio, none of that. Entirely self-made. 100% through and through. Entirely self-made. As a black man. And if that's not enough to convince you that you can make it in this country, Kamala Harris is the first black vice president. Obama was the first black president. You trying to tell me that you can't make it in America? Home Depot, the CEO of Home Depot, and I'm not lying about this, I have this from direct sources. The CEO of Home Depot doesn't have a high school diploma. And you want to try and tell me, no GED either, and you want to try and tell me that you can't make it in this society. It ain't nothing but a load of fucking horse shit. You gotta apply yourself. You gotta get out there. You gotta sweat. You gotta bleed. You gotta grind. It's hard. But when you put the boots down, you lace up, you shut up, and you zip up, and you just get out there and do the work, you will always make it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be long. It's going to be difficult. And yes, there are asshole, toxic people, racist, motherfucker, bigot bastards out there of all kinds. Because hate doesn't care about your race. It doesn't care about who you are or what you think. Hate is hate. You can make it. I promise you. Thank you for coming to my channel. I've been DM as always. I'll see you next time.